Alison O'Reilly was one of the journalists at the government press conference yesterday.
Alison O'Reilly from ITV News. Minister, a lot of the families of the children who died would have claimed that their death certificates were falsified and this could have led to illegal adoptions, and there's no proof of this, but also the report says it can't disprove this either. But we're up to 9,000 children dead and a lot of them haven't been found. How do you know? And why weren't there other excavations done at other sites like Bessborough, where there's over 800 children dead?
And Alison O'Reilly is on the phone. We might hear some of the Minister's response to your questions there yesterday, Alison. But thanks for joining us and indeed for taking the time to give us your view on this report that was published yesterday. You're probably closer to the shame that we feel as a country than most of us. What did you think of what the Commission had to say in its report?
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Michael. I was very disappointed, I have to say. And, you know, I'm very close to a lot of the families of the children who died and the survivors. I've gotten to know them very well over the last 10 years, but particularly since 2014 when this story came out. You know, it's a typical kind of government report, even though it's an independent report. It's a kind of shared blame. I was very, very shocked at the whole suggestion by the Taoiseach yesterday that this was a societal issue and that families were putting these unmarried mothers into homes. And it became a shared blame yesterday.
Yeah.
But it was.
And if everybody is wrong, nobody is wrong. Nobody can be held accountable because it was everybody's fault.
Exactly. And that's completely wrong, because anybody who grew up in that era knows that the church ran this country with an iron fist and the state let them away with it.
Well, this was the fault of the fathers and the women's families, it would seem, most of all.
Yeah, I mean, I was absolutely horrified at that, because I thought, hang on a second, everybody knows what Archbishop McQuaid was doing, and everybody knows that the state allowed this to happen. There was more than 160 institutions around Ireland. Only 14 mother and baby homes were investigated and 4 county homes. So that means more than 160,000 women and children went through these homes in total. But only 57,000 homes or people were investigated in relation to the traffic that was going in and out of these selected homes. And then only around 500 people took part in this investigation. It's a report commissioned by the government. And already we're hearing, well, you know, your family are to blame. I'll quote Annette Mackay, who's from the Tune Babies family group. She said, families to blame, some unkind behaviour on the part of the religious, no evidence of criminality or illegal fostering or adoption. What am I listening to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the Taoiseach was saying yesterday he feels very sorry for what the women went through. Everybody does. The nuns do. They've issued statements to that effect. Anybody who picks up a newspaper this morning would feel very sorry for anybody who had to endure that type of treatment. And I'm sure people outside of this country will feel sorry for them. But the women aren't looking for sympathy. They're looking for an honest apology for a wrongdoing that was meted out on them, and that the state should be apologising for neglecting its duty of care. And it should be apologising for how they were neglected by the people who were franchised to give that care, namely the nuns.
Well, they really should be asking these people for their forgiveness, Michael, I think, really, because at the end of the day, the state did not do their job and allowed 9,000 children to die. And this story began with 796 babies buried in a septic tank in the west of Ireland. It's now 2021, and I did that story in 2014. And today I can tell you, we've still no further to excavating that grave.
Yep.
Still no further to finding those children. But from Tuam, we now know that there's mass graves all over Ireland. 9,000 children are missing, and we're still where we were when we began in 2014.
And Roderick O'Gorman was telling you yesterday that he will be bringing forward legislation to allow for the excavation to take place in Tuam. But I don't think he was saying that the same thing will happen in Bessborough. We'll hear a little bit from the Minister now.
The Commission has identified that they have not found conclusively the site in Bessborough. I know I've spoken to residents in Bessborough, to groups representing mothers and survivors for Bessborough. I know they believe they've identified a particular site and they're looking for that to be appropriately protected. And one of the things we identify in the action plan is for sites where We don't maybe require the degree of intervention of a full excavation, because obviously that is traumatic, and it's only in probably the most extreme circumstances like Tuam that you might want to do that. But there are other circumstances where a burial site perhaps has become neglected, and it allows the government is committed to ensure, and working with local authorities to ensure that burial sites associated with mother and baby homes or county homes are appropriately protected and appropriately treated.
That's somewhat different to what you were asking him if an excavation would take place in Bessborough.
Yes, he didn't answer my question. And when I tried to ask him again, I mean, it was just moved on. And I went back again to ask another question, and they wrapped up. Like, he didn't answer what exactly they're going to do. There are mass graves all over Ireland. They haven't identified a grave on the site of Bessborough where there's 817 registered deaths that I got under Freedom of Information, but they've only managed to find one grave, and yet the whole site wasn't excavated, and the nuns are now selling it off to make profit, and there could be children on that site that haven't been found. And that's possibly what happened in Tuam. How can that be allowed to happen? Because one grave is too much.
If it wasn't for yourself and Catherine Corliss, quite obviously, I'm not sure that we'd be having this conversation today. I'm not sure we'd have that report published yesterday, albeit a disappointing report. But it's with thanks to you, Alison, that we've shed a light on this terrible part of our recent history. But we're all up in arms now. And yesterday, one of the ministers at the press conference, Anne Rabbitte, was up in arms, and she was speaking with fire and fury about how she felt about the whole thing. But we're going to hear a little bit from that press conference and some of the interaction between yourself and the minister.
For Tuam would be better off spent for children today that need it. What's your comments now?
Those comments, I didn't write a headline on that article, and the comments were taken out of context. At that moment in time, I was frustrated that the Commission wasn't coming to a conclusion. At that stage, I think I had stood in the House of the Dáil and I had approved 5 different extensions. I was looking for a timeline because the frustration for the survivors and the mothers, people wanted a conclusion, they wanted the Commission to come to an end, and happily we're here today.
And so Anne Rabbitte, she seems to have changed her mind, Alison.
I mean, she didn't answer my question again. They never do. They never answer your question. But I mean, did she ring up the Irish Business Post and ask them to redact those comments, or to retract those comments? Sorry. She said the 13 million being allocated to excavate the children's site in Tuam to exhume those babies would be better off spent on children today. And now she's standing there all fire and brimstone about how dreadful this whole period was, and how, she quoted from the report with passion. She was nearly crying. Oh, yeah. And yet I was looking at her saying, hang on a second. You're the very one who said, leave them where they are. But look, don't they all, once they come into power, the whole thing changes. Well, Martin was down in Cork promising excavations in Bessborough, and now he's blaming society. I
think the last thing you just said about them coming into power may ring loudly in the ears of some of the Green Party supporters, given that Roderick O'Gorman is the minister, and that he caused so much upset in the lead into this report being published, and now seems to be standing over the Commission's view that you can't make statements that would find people legally accountable.
I know. I mean, it's the way they changed their stance. When we get into power, we will make sure that X, Y, and Z is done. We'll have that great have redress. We will do anything that you want us to do. Then they get into power, and it's, we have to follow the law. And the Attorney General said this, that, and the other. By the way, those records did not have to be sealed. It was an absolute disaster. They kept saying we didn't agree to the sealing of the records. This is what the Attorney General said. But then they were totally contradicted by the Data Protection Commissioner and confused everybody. But that legislation was rushed through as well. And this has been rushed through. I don't know why we're getting an apology today. It's a 3,000 page
I don't know what they're apologising for. I think it's like, I read the paper this morning. I feel sorry that anybody went through that. I don't know if they're saying we are apologising because as a state we neglected our duty of care to you women and the people we franchised it out to. The nuns abused that position that they were put in to care for these women, and that there should be compensation and redress, and we take responsibility for that in full. But Alison, you know better than anybody that the government has an awful lot of staff working for it, a lot of script writers and so on. The script writers were very busy and they've written great headlines for the papers in relation to how bad the government feels about what happened to all of these women. But when it broke down into the questions, and yes, they such as the ones we heard between you and Anne Rabbitte, there were some interesting moments, and I thought the Taoiseach's attitude towards redress was very interesting, and he seemed to be standing over the deal that Michael Woods did with the survivors of the industrial schools, a deal that gave the religious orders a get out of jail card and resulted in them footing about 10% of the overall bill, if I remember correctly. And it's the same man who was in the same government that let the religious off who's now saying that well, perhaps it would be the right thing for them to do is to cough up, but I can't say any more than that at the moment.
No, I mean, the religious orders need to pay for this. They did this, and the state need to contribute as well. Those who are responsible need to pay for this, and whether that's through money, redress, support systems, as well as criminality. I mean, why isn't there a Garda investigation into this? The report, again, does not allow for criminal investigations. But the Taoiseach said yesterday, well, we will be looking at that. But nobody's going to jail for this. Nobody. 9,000 children are dead and more than 160,000 women went through these homes. But no one's going to go to jail. Nobody's going to go to jail because they're all dead.
And
as far as we're told.
And pages of evidence given by survivors telling of 12-year-olds being raped, and a priest in one circumstance, I think, examining one of the young girls internally for 45 minutes.
I know, absolutely horrifying. Well, there's an 82-year-old woman living in Cabra called Rose McKinney, and she doesn't mind me quoting her because she's done plenty of interviews with me. She was 13 years old when she was put into the Tuam mother and baby home pregnant. The report says the Gardaí were not notified of underage pregnancies. And Rose McKinney says, and I quote, "Yes, they did. Because when I ran away from the Tuam home, it was the guards that came with the nuns to take me back." Now, how is that ignored? She was 13 years old and she had baby after baby after baby in her teenage years. 3 babies were taken from her, all before she was 19. And the guards did come. They came to her house with the nuns and took her away. I mean, it doesn't dig deep. They're only reporting what they were told. As I said, 500 survivors spoke to the Commission, but there's 57,000 people in these 18 homes alone that weren't interviewed. There's the idea that there was very little sexual abuse and that the industrial homes abuse was worse. Why are we comparing them? Why? I find that absolutely dreadful. Plenty of women went in there pregnant as a result of a sexual assault. And yet they were the ones that were treated like criminals. And to say stupid things like, well, they could have left, except they just weren't told they could have left. These women had nowhere else to go. They were shunned completely. And not only that, they were named on the pulpit by the priest for shaming their family. And even when you did get out of these hellholes, you weren't allowed to forget it, and that's why you had a load of women leaving to America and England.
Shamed by the priest on the pulpit, but the report says that wasn't as common as people seem to think it was, which is really, really bizarre, I think, to most Irish ears. Susan Lohan was telling us earlier on this morning, Alison, that most of the survivors won't have had the chance to read this report at all, let alone all 3,000 pages of it at this stage. When they do, what do you think will be the reaction?
Well, I mean, for example, that's a very good point, and I'm glad you raised it, because the webinar yesterday between the Minister, the Taoiseach and survivors expected people in their 80s and 90s to log in. Now, my 95-year-old granny, when she was alive, was able to use the internet, but my 78-year-old father can't. So, and I'm not, I'm not saying elderly people can't use technology, but Rose McKinney had to have a laptop set up on her front wall for her and set up and plugged in so she could look at it. Some of these people were never educated and can't read. It's 3,000 pages long. It's going to take months for them to understand it, for it to go in. So what is there an apology today for when people don't even understand half of what went on yesterday? I just think when it fully does go in, what this report shows, it's just going to be more questions than answers. Confusion, hurt, let down. They're the words I'm hearing yesterday. But the most common word to describe the report is whitewash. And that's what I'm hearing on the ground. And that the violence wasn't that bad.
Alison, thanks for joining us. It's nice to talk to you, by the way. And as I say, thanks for joining us this morning. Alison O'Reilly, a journalist with ITV News and author. You can read about life in the Tune Mother and Baby Home in Alison's book, My Name is Bridget, The Untold Story of Bridget Dolan and the Tune Mother and Baby Home. And Alison O'Reilly from Drogheda is the journalist who broke the Tune Baby story.
Michael Reade on LMFM.